Prince Midas II sat motionless on his throne. It was cast from solid gold, a seat of absolute, unyielding weight. Around him, the hall stood silent. Statues of his own likeness lined the walls, each one a mirror of his cold, yellow reflection. He shifted his weight, and the sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the chamber like a funeral bell. He looked down at his hands. Heavy rings sat upon his knuckles, pressing into his skin with a dull, constant ache. He squinted as the morning sunlight struck the floor, bouncing off the polished surface in blinding, jagged flares. He turned his head, watching his own image flicker across the statues. There was no warmth here, only the flat, reflected stare of a man who owned everything and touched nothing. He reached up, readjusting the metal band on his finger, his thumb dragging across the hard, unyielding surface. He stood, his movements stiff and deliberate. The floor felt hard beneath his boots, offering no give, no natural resistance. He looked toward the heavy doors that led to the forest edge, his jaw set in a sharp, impatient line. He was finished with the stillness of the hall. He needed the world outside to match the stillness of his wealth. Midas pushed the palace doors open and stepped into the light. The transition was jarring. Instead of the polished floor, his boots sank into soft, dark soil. He recoiled, lifting his heels high, his face twisting in disgust as mud clung to the soles. The forest air was thick, humid, and smelled of decaying leaves and wet earth. He marched forward, his pace erratic. A low-hanging branch blocked his path, snagging on his shoulder. He swiped at it, but the wood resisted, snapping back to slap his hand. "Ooh, this forest is so messy," he spat, his voice sharp against the soft rustle of leaves. He looked up at the canopy, where sunlight filtered through in dappled patterns. It was irregular, untamed, and entirely beyond his control. He reached out, grabbing a handful of ferns, feeling the damp, fibrous texture against his palms. He wiped his hands on his sides, desperate to be rid of the moisture. Why can't the trees be gold? Why can't the birds be diamonds? He swung his arm in a wide arc, pointing toward the dense thicket ahead. The stillness of his throne room felt miles away. He glared at a cluster of wildflowers, imagining them frozen, hardened, and polished into permanent, lifeless statues. He needed this chaos to stop. A flicker of light caught the corner of his eye. A single petal, glowing with a faint, pulsing warmth, detached from a nearby shrub and hovered in the air. The light expanded, folding outward until a figure stood before him. Her wings were transparent, humming with the rapid vibration of a dragonfly, and her presence brought a sudden, sharp scent of rain and clover. She did not bow. She hovered at his eye level, her expression calm and unyielding. "Careful what you wish for, Prince," she said, her voice sounding like the rustle of dry grass. "Life is beautiful because it grows, because it changes. Gold is a dead thing. It never grows." Midas did not look at the petal or the light. He stared past her, his gaze fixated on the canopy above. He stepped forward, forcing the fairy to drift back to maintain space. He extended a finger, pointing toward the dense, tangled thicket. "I do not want growth. I want permanence," he countered, his voice rising in volume. "I want a world that stays exactly as I place it. Look at this mess. It is chaotic and weak. I wish this entire forest were as precious, as heavy, and as static as my vault." He stood his ground, waiting for the air to obey his command, his face set in a mask of absolute, unearned certainty. The fairy stared at him for a long heartbeat, her wings slowing to a stop. She sighed, a sound that lacked warmth, and raised her wand. The air between them instantly sharpened. A low vibration began to rattle the ground, vibrating through the soles of his boots. Midas felt the hairs on his arms rise as the humidity vanished, replaced by an ozone-heavy chill. Above, the canopy groaned. The wind died completely, yet the leaves began to tremble in a violent, synchronized shiver. Every creature in the vicinity, The squirrels in the branches, the insects in the brush abruptly ceased their movement, then scattered in a frantic, silent retreat. The fairy gripped her wand, the tip pulsing with a brilliant, blinding white flare that bleached the color from the surrounding trunks. She flicked the wand in a wide, sweeping arc. A ripple of distorted light tore through the air, expanding like a shockwave. It moved with terrifying speed, bending the light around it, turning the green shadows into a deep, bruised violet. Midas braced himself, his hands trembling as the wave of magic rushed toward the trees. The forest held its breath, braced for the irreversible transformation that was about to strip the life from every living thing in its path. The shockwave passed through the first line of oaks. Where the bark had been soft and damp, it hardened instantly into rigid, polished plates. The leaves did not fall. They stiffened, turning into thin, brittle sheets of metal that scraped against one another with a high-pitched, discordant ringing. The sound moved like a tidal wave through the canopy, a relentless progression of snapping twigs and clinking branches. Below, the grass, once a lush, swaying carpet, transformed into a dense thicket of jagged golden wires. Every blade grew sharp, freezing in place as the sap within them solidified into heavy, immovable gold. Midas watched as the transformation reached the ferns, the delicate fronds turning into solid, weighted ornaments that bowed toward the earth. The air, previously thick with the scent of damp soil and blooming flowers, turned sterile and sharp. The vibrant, chaotic noise of the woods, the rustling, the chirping, the wind vanished in a heartbeat. In its place came a hollow, ringing silence that pressed against the ears. The forest was no longer a living thing. It was a vault, a motionless gallery of yellow metal, where nothing breathed, nothing moved, and nothing could ever grow again. The light of the sun hit the new, frozen landscape, reflecting off the gold with a blinding, harsh glare that made the world look like a tomb. Midas stood in the center of the clearing, his boots clicking sharply against the metallic ground. He reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of a nearby tree. It was cold, unnaturally smooth, and entirely devoid of the roughness of bark. He walked deeper into the thicket, his eyes scanning the branches for the fruit he had seen just moments before. He spotted a low-hanging apple, its skin polished to a mirror finish. He reached for it, intending to pluck it, but his fingers slipped. The surface was hard, unyielding, and lacked the slight give of organic skin. He gripped it with both hands, pulling with all his strength, but the apple was fused to the branch as if they were a single piece of cast metal. He tugged again, his jaw tightening, but the fruit would not budge. He tried another, then another, his hands moving frantically from branch to branch. Every piece of fruit was solid, heavy, and impossible to harvest. The scent of sweet juice and damp earth had been replaced by the metallic tang of gold dust. He stopped, his chest heaving, and stared at his own palms. He had demanded wealth, and the forest had obeyed. Now, standing amidst the bounty of his own making, he realized he could not eat a single bite. The silence of the woods felt heavier, a crushing weight that reminded him of the hunger beginning to stir in his stomach. Midas turned away from the trees, his gaze catching a flicker of light trapped in the upper branches. He stepped closer, navigating the jagged, metallic undergrowth. Perched on a rigid golden bough sat a bird. It was not gold like the rest of the woods, but clear, fragile glass. It looked as though it had been mid-flight when the magic struck, locking its wings in an eternal, desperate arc. Midas reached up, his movements slow and careful. He lifted the bird from its perch. It was unnaturally cold, a biting frost that seeped through his skin. He noticed the heavy coating of gold dust clinging to its translucent feathers, weighing them down, pulling the creature toward the floor. He tapped the bird's chest, expecting the soft thrum of a heartbeat, but felt only the hard, unyielding resistance of solid glass. He tilted the bird back and forth, watching the light catch the edges of its wings. There was no movement, no breath, no rhythm. The silence of the forest seemed to coalesce around this single broken object. Midas stood motionless, the weight of the bird pressing into his palm. He looked at the vast frozen expanse surrounding him and finally understood the cost of his wish. The song had been silenced, the life had been drained, and he was the sole witness to a world that had ceased to breathe. Midas looked down at the glass creature, his own reflection distorted in its frozen eyes. He saw the hollow space where a heart should have been. The silence of the forest was no longer just an absence of sound. It was a physical pressure against his eardrums. He thought of the vibrant woods that once existed, the rustle of leaves, and the chaotic, beautiful mess of growth he had discarded for this cold perfection. He gripped the bird tighter, his knuckles white. A single, hot tear welled up, blurring his vision, and broke free. It tracked a slow, jagged path down his cheek before falling. He watched it descend, a tiny, liquid sphere in the stagnant air. It struck the bird directly on its glass chest. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the point of contact shifted. A vein of brilliant, pulsing blue erupted from the droplet. It spread like spilled ink through the brittle material, dissolving the rigid edges. The glass softened, losing its sharp, jagged clarity. Beneath his thumb, the texture changed, warming instantly. A faint, rhythmic pulse vibrated against his skin. The bird shivered, its head snapping upright, and it let out a single, sharp, clear note that cut through the metallic stillness like a blade. The note from the bird rang out, a pure frequency that shattered the stillness. Where the sound touched the ground, the golden grass buckled. It rippled like water, turning from jagged wire into soft, swaying blades of green. The metal trunks of the trees groaned, the gold flaking away in sheets to reveal rough, living bark beneath. Flowers burst from the undergrowth, their petals unfurling with the speed of a sudden sunrise. Midas watched, stunned, as the riverbed shifted. The solid gold floor cracked and melted, letting the cool, rushing water flow over smooth, dark stones once more. The air grew thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. He looked at his hands, watching the heavy gold rings slide against his skin. They felt like lead, like anchors dragging him toward a dead past. He pulled the first ring, then the second, and let them drop. They hit the soft dirt with a dull thud, sinking into the soil. He did not look for them. He stood still, feeling the cool wind move through the branches above. The forest was breathing again, and for the first time in his life, Midas felt the weight of his own existence vanish into the quiet, living rhythm of the world. The sun dipped below the horizon, spilling deep purple across the canopy. Midas set his crown aside on a flat, weathered wooden table. He did not look back at it. He lay down on the soft forest floor, pulling the quiet around him like a blanket. Overhead, the bird tucked its wings deep into the leaves, settling into the safety of the dark. In the distance, the tiny lights in the mushroom houses clicked off, one by one, leaving the world in shadow. The wind picked up, a low, rhythmic hum that vibrated through the branches, acting as a slow, steady heartbeat for the woods. Midas closed his eyes, listening to the rustle of the trees and the soft pulse of the earth beneath him. The world was finally still. The world was safe. Now, it is your turn, little dreamer. The day is done. Close your eyes. Take a deep, slow breath. Feel the tension leave your limbs. Let the quiet of the forest lead you away. Your own adventure begins in your dreams tonight. Sleep now, and let the stars watch over your journey until the morning light returns.